My name is Devyn,
My name is George.
and this is the 13th appointment with your Medicinema.
There's a few little news to get into. 28 years later is in the works. Danny Boyle and Alex Garland teamed up again to create another sequel to the zombie series that has been confirmed for a while. Now, however, we got a bit more details because they announced the casting of Jodie Comer, Aaron Taylor-Johnson, and Ralph Fiennes. Are you a big 28 Days Later fan, Devin?
I remember really liking the first 28 Days Later when it came out. It was really different. Not many zombie movies had tried to do not zombies, try to do something, a little different. The rage virus or whatever is in this. Now, it's like every zombie show or movie is like, they're not actually zombies. It's a fungal infection or it's a this or it's a that. It's like, that's like the par for the course now.
Yeah, it was definitely influential, yeah.
Yeah, but I remember liking it a lot. I don't know if it would hold up today, to be real honest.
I have seen it like a year ago or something like that. It was still really good. I like 28 Days Later a lot. I still have never watched 28 Weeks Later, but I will definitely check it out before this trilogy actually releases, because there are going to be 3 28 Years Later movies. But yeah, I'm very excited for it. I'm a big fan of Alex Garland's writing, big fan of Danny Boyle's directing, and knowing that they both team up again for this, I'm excited.
Yeah, I'll be on the lookout for that. It's kind of interesting that there's going to be 3 of them, you said? Because,
Yeah.
it seems like they're keeping with the convention of 28 days, 28 weeks, 28 years. So is it just be 28 years, 1, 2, 3? Or is it going to be 28 years later, 28 decades later, 28 centuries later?
I think all of those 3 are gonna play out 28 years later after the initial thing. I wonder how exactly that's gonna work out. If I could see something like maybe, I don't know, 28 years later Tokyo, 28 years later New York, and 28 years later Paris or something like that, have it like play out in 3 different locations but at the same time, and how different cultures affected. Something like that would be my guess.
Interesting. Yeah, maybe. The next piece of news we have is that for the first time in 40 years, Sundance is considering moving cities. Mid-April, they decided to open themselves up for bidding. Right now, I think the big front runner is San Francisco, is really trying to get a hold of Sundance.
An odd little thing to think about. I've never heard of any practice like this before, that a film festival kind of offers itself to to investors and it's like, yeah, we're free to move places. We can do this everywhere. Just give us money.
That's yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's a big thing. In 2020, it was estimated that it made the state of Utah $167 million just to have Sundance exist, just to be there for the time it's there. That's how much money it made. So I mean, that's a boon to any state or city that can have it. Is a big deal.
For sure.
I don't think that the town that Sundance is in is very big. I believe it's called Parktown, and or Park City. From what I've understood before is that it kind of trashes the town.
Overwhelmed with the amount of tourism all stuffed within 1 week.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's like kind of like Amsterdam.
Yeah, they dialed back on slogans and stuff like that. Yeah, there's some cities that definitely have a problem with overwhelming tourism for sure. And yeah, I can see that if it's not like a giant city, that they just straight up don't have the capacity to keep up with like, enough garbage trucks or anything to collect all the influx of additional garbage being produced in that 1 week.
Which, it makes sense then for somewhere like San Francisco, is a bigger city, has more kind of resources, right, to deal with that. And then some other cities that are running in this bidding is Atlanta, Minneapolis, and a town I grew up in, Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is an interesting choice because it is a tourist city. Santa Fe every year goes through a whole tourist phase during the summer. The Indian markets open and stuff, and they have huge influxes of people. It's the oldest.
So they are used to that.
Yep, it's the oldest standing city in the United States. It's not the oldest American city because it was a Mexican city before America took it over. But but it's the oldest like standing buildings and stuff in the United States. So yeah,
That's cool.
it's a big tourist trap. So yeah, it makes sense for a tourist trap town to want to have more tourist shit. Probably have it during the off season, of their own tourism.
Yeah, it's interesting. Let's see where this develops.
Is there a film festival that you wish would relocate closer to you?
All of them.
All of them. Not a specific
Move
one,
all
though?
of them to Vienna.
Well, you already have one. You got a huge one. The Vienna Film Festival isn't a small festival, correct?
Yeah, it's big. Like, it's not one of the big five, but it's definitely in Europe one of like the secondary wave big film festivals for sure. Yeah, I can't complain. I'm just kidding, obviously. But yeah, like, I guess the one that would be super awesome, because there isn't really anything here that compares to it, would be the Annex Festival, the big animation festival in France.
I didn't even know that was a thing.
It's super old. Like, it's almost as old as animation as a medium is. It's the biggest animation festival in the world, and pretty much all the important animation films each year premiere there. So the Cartoon Saloon stuff pretty much exclusively premieres there. Loving Vincent premiered there. You name it. But yeah, from acquisitions of film festivals, we move on to an update for the possible acquisition of Paramount, a news we talked about briefly in the last episode relating to the CinemaCon. Despite Gladiator 2 not even releasing yet, companies are already eyeing towards Paramount and handing in their bids to buy it out. First, there was the news that Skydance teamed up with an equity firm called Redbird Capital and made an offer for the company. Redbird Capital, we looked into it a bit, is kind of odd as a choice, because next to owning Skydance, they mainly own sports companies. So both in, I guess, soccer and baseball, they are pretty big players, owning the football clubs AC Milan, the Italian football club, and Liverpool in England. But also in America, they own the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox baseball team. So yeah, that's definitely a choice. That company apparently wants to go into the movie industry more.
I was thinking about this, right? You don't have Hulu in Europe, but Hulu here, we have live sports is often attached to it here. And it looks like, the companies that they own, because it looks like they're involved in the actual NFL. I wouldn't be surprised if they're going to be attempt to try to put sports into Paramount Plus.
That could be it,
into that streaming service and get their sports streamed.
But there's also been a more recent and probably the more serious offer by Sony, who also teamed up with an equity firm called Apollo Global Management and apparently bid $27 billion for Paramount.
Yeah, which is a drop in the hat for somebody like Sony, a company who makes roughly in the last year, whatever, netted around $1 trillion as an entire company. But Apollo Global Management, they're sitting around with the ADT home security company. They have Redbox. They have Qdoba, the Mexican restaurant in the United States. Yahoo. They own Yahoo.
Verizon.
Yeah, they're just a gigantic company.
They, interestingly enough, also own a studio already. They are behind Legendary Pictures.
Oh.
So that's interesting.
Now, hold on. Who distributes Legendary Pictures stuff on streaming services right now?
Apparently, they collaborate with Warner Bros. So maybe their stuff is on Max. Yeah.
Well, Skydance, the Redbird company, Skydance movies, we talked about off mic for a minute, are often Tom Cruise films, but they are actually already a big partner with Paramount. They make a lot of Paramount's movies already. So if Redbird went through with this deal, it would probably just stay Paramount, and they would just produce more content for Paramount. But if Sony acquires this, and they already have Legendary, which is already partnered with Max or HBO, or whatever you want to call it now, it wouldn't make sense to split their thing between two streaming services, wouldn't it? Would they want to like consolidate that?
As far as I understand it, Legendary is also just like partnering with Warner Bros. They are like, they don't have an exclusive deal or anything. And yeah, so that's that. But you're bringing up an interesting point. That is, Sony is the one of the big studios that doesn't have an own streaming service, and they are still, they are just like selling their properties to the other streamers.
So Sony actually does have a streaming service, and it's not great at all whatsoever. It's called Sony Pictures Core.
What?
Yeah,
I've never heard of this.
I know. Hold on. Just follow me with this. So it was made for Bravia, which is like a television set that they sell, and it was going to be their streaming service to get all their Sony stuff through their television service. And it didn't do super great, right? But they've recently tried to really rebrand it. It was called Bravia Core, and that's what they renamed it, Sony Pictures Core. And just in the last like couple months, at least that's when it started showing up for people who have PlayStations. They just suddenly got it, and it gives you access to Sony's entire library if you pay for PlayStation services. So now everybody who has a PlayStation now has a streaming service built into their PlayStation. And that's only been active, I think, for maybe like 3 or 4 months. It's, again, very ham-fisted. It's not easy to use. It's a terrible UI. It's a terrible system. But so it would make sense for them to want to maybe utilize Paramount's, backbone for that.
Is the UI of Paramount Plus good? I have never used it. I've only heard complaints about that too.
No, it's fine for me. I haven't had a problem with it, really. It's not great. Honestly, to be really honest, what UI is good right now I mean, beyond streaming services, in much of anything right now? UI and UX is in a terrible, terrible state right now. It's like all designed to be terrible. But no, streaming services specifically just have garbage UI. All of them are garbage.
Well, on this high note, we'll, I guess, move on from financial matters and go back to the actual arts of filmmaking. Starting off with our first movie that we will discuss today, the 2021 animation documentary hybrid Flea. Directed by Jonas Poher Rasmussen, this film follows the story of Amin and his journey from Afghanistan to Denmark. Starting off, his entire family flees, but due to unforeseen problems, they get split up more and more along the way. We see abuse, but also beauty, violence, and love. Devyn, this was your first time watching this, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
How did you experience it?
This was good. This was a good movie. I watched this second to our second movie, so not in the correct order of our discussion. And I think that may have hurt my reaction to this film. I appreciate the animation in this movie. I want to get that right out the door. It's the first thing you see. It's the stark thing about this film is that it's animated. I don't think it's rotoscoped, right? I think it's just straight animated.
I think there's some shots there that are rotoscope animation, but yeah, mostly it's straight up animation.
Yeah. The art is fine. The animation is fine. I'm not going to judge it on its merit of what it looks like in style. How do I feel about that or whatever? It's just the creativity behind it is slightly underwhelming at times to me because there's so much you can do with animation, and this feels very bare bones. There's a couple times where it pushes a little more creative limit, but I was a little underwhelmed by that, and that kind of bummed me out. But that's only half of this movie. The other half really of this movie is the story that they're telling. Is this documentary that's being made? It was a really interesting story. I don't know what kind of immigration Austria has, if that's a topic in your everyday life, if that's hopefully not everyday life for anybody, but you know what I mean? But like in Austrian news, right? It's clearly a huge thing in America. Immigration is a big political leaning in America in one direction or the other. You don't hear here, at least, you don't hear about the immigration into other countries like Denmark, you know? So that was really interesting to see.
I can shed a bit of light on that. Generally speaking, it's not that people tend to flee to Denmark specifically or like Austria specifically. It's more this idea of Europe as a whole, Europe as a continent. So yeah, there's two major refugee routes coming to Europe, and both those movies like show the two different sides. Basically, you have the land route through the Balkan from the Middle East, and you have the Mediterranean route over the sea from Africa. It's a big point of contention here as well. There's some odd laws relating to it, with people have to kind of apply for refugee status in the first country that they arrive, which obviously is like puts a big strain on the bordering countries, and therefore people like try to flee within European countries from one to the other to get a little more central. And then stuff like this happens where, you know, he fled to Denmark, and usually you wouldn't arrive in Denmark first, but that's the one where authorities got a hold of him basically, and therefore it's considered the first country where he arrives. There's a lot of odd things going on with refugee handling in Europe, and it's definitely within the European Union, it's a big conflict between the countries of how to manage that. What country has what responsibilities, and, you know, how do you share that burden? What's fair here?
It's so interesting. Like, even the language that we're using to discuss this is different. And clearly, you know, these people are all refugees. In the US, if you listen to the news, either side, you would never hear the word refugees used. It's always immigrants, immigrants, immigrants. You never hear the word refugees. It's just, you know, shitty spinning semantics is all that is. I really did enjoy the like story of this. I really enjoyed the LGBTQ like aspect of this. It was very wholesome, this movie, in a weird way, for being what it was about.
Yeah, for sure. Really like that about it. To get a bit into your, I guess, animation complaints, you said it felt a bit underwhelming to you because animation obviously has a lot of potential to do anything, basically, you know. Animation has this infinite potential, really. Yeah. And I can see that. I can see how you would want something more magical out of this, how they could have done a lot. And the route they went is a very minimal, for sure. I appreciate it a lot, actually. I think there's quite some merit to that, because I'll quickly get into how this story and this film came to be. So Amin, which is a fake name for anonymity's sake, he was called an Amin in the movie. Amin and the filmmaker have been friends since they were teenagers, basically. The filmmaker never knew the details of Amin's life. He always kept to himself, and he didn't want to talk about that kind of stuff. As we find out later in the movie, why that was kind of indoctrinated into him to never talk about the details of how he got here and his family and all of those. The filmmaker friend wanted to always tell his story. He knew that there were many things bubbling under the surface, really, that could be talked about and should probably be talked about. But Amin never felt comfortable, you know, even talking to him about it. So how would he ever feel comfortable talking to a wider audience and talking to a screen, to a camera about it? And at some point, an animation crew just approached the filmmaker and was like, "Hey, we wanted to work with you. Do you have any story you would you would need animation for?" And that's how this came to be, and offered Amin a chance to kind of hide and still tell the story. The animation itself allowed them in an odd roundabout way, which you wouldn't expect, to kind of be more historically accurate than they could have done on their budget if it was a straight up classical documentary.
Like, you mean with the architecture and stuff like that?
Yeah, they could take reference pictures of the accurate time and just recreate the way Moscow looked back then, you know? On that budget, you could never fit an entire street of Moscow to look that way it looked back then. You could never afford to rent a bunch of old cars and just park them in the street to look like that. You know, it's impossible on that budget. But just using reference pictures and imagery and video material, they could pretty accurately recreate the time. So they definitely, they didn't go any magical route. They quite went the opposite and tried to be historically accurate within the confines of animation. And I think that's a super interesting approach. And they do have some stylized parts, you know? There's those grayish, don't know how to describe it, sequences.
I call them the anxiety moments.
The anxiety moments is a great way to put it, yeah.
Yeah.
For whenever, you know, something is more emotionally driven. And particularly the director talked about they use those to create moments where they don't have the detail, where sometimes it's just stories that Amin was told, so he didn't live through it exactly, and he can only go so far with retelling that story because it's not his. Sometimes it's stuff that's like it was too painful for Amin, so he kind of blocked it out of his memory and he can't recall the details.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a tasteful way of stylization, and it makes a lot of thematic sense within the story of how they used it. So yeah, I don't have those kind of complaints, and I guess those are the reasons why.
I didn't, necessarily want something more magical. I wanted something just with a few more creative elements, like that, like you mentioned, like those anxiety moments, things like that. I think it's something as simple as like there's moments where Amin is like laying on a table and he's recalling everything, and then you transition back to his story, right? There is nothing that visually gives you the signal that you are going from current to memory. And there just could have been any kind of visual cue transitions or anything like that. It felt very, like you said, it's very minimal. It's very, very, very minimal. I really love that they can recreate the world with animation is such a great point I wouldn't have thought about. That makes so much sense, and I really, really, really adore that. But I'm kind of bummed to hear that it's like a third-partied animation crew that was just like, hey, we unconnectedly to this film want to work with you, right? That's cool. But I thought that the reason that the animation looked the way it did was maybe because it's the guy who's telling the stories like tight way of drawing or something, or like because it's very simple. Like the people are very simple. That's why it's near rotoscope looking almost. So I assumed that this was like either someone in the storytelling or the director or something, like this is their art form, this is the way they art, or maybe this was like a fellow Middle Eastern LGBTQ artist who was doing this artwork. Like you could have done so much cool stuff with that. Like it could have used a lot more like traditional like Afghani art styles in it, like there could have been a lot of really cool things you could have done. As the movie goes on and he travels from place to place, start incorporating art from those places,
I think there's one problem to be directly addressed, that is just that the budget probably limited their options a lot. It would be awesome to have super fancy kind of, I don't know, Satoshi Kon transitions from the interview setting into the movie. That
you don't have to go that far.
I'm over exaggerating, but giving an example.
Okay. Yeah.
It would be awesome to have something like that. I think that's mainly a reason the main reason that we don't is the budgeting. Because in the animation, and I've heard this complaint before, there is, this has a very low frame rate.
Yeah.
This is at times very choppy, and you kind of have to get over that and have to take that as your reality in the movie and just accept it. And if you can't get over that, then this movie just fails straight up to you. You won't be able to enjoy it.
It's some 2010 Flash animation vibes sometimes.
Yeah, it does. I don't have a problem with it really. It's like jarring to me in the first minutes, but my brain just kind of accepted it, and I could just go along with it. But I can see that being a major problem. And that's for sure straight up budgeting. They didn't have the money to draw all the in-betweens, It's
What was the budget of this movie?
3.4 million.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's fair. I was thinking of Persepolis.
Mm-hmm.
It's not much more. It's like 4 more million, but still,
yeah,
it's still,
more than double.
It's double. It's double. Yeah, double the budget. Yeah, it's not a huge budget still, but yeah, no, it is still. It's definitely more than that. A lot more than that.
Yeah, for sure.
I do wish that the animation team was more. I thought there was more meaning behind it. I guess.
Mm-hmm. I guess since we already talked about more the behind the scenes stuff and started with that one, I'll quickly finish up that part of the story and talk about the filmmaker itself. Before becoming a filmmaker, he worked in radio, doing audio documentary pieces and interviews. That's also where the laying down came from. That's a technique he kind of developed within working with a radio, where he felt that since you didn't see it, he could record the person in whatever position he wanted. And the people felt way more comfortable laying down and being able, having their eyes closed and kind of recall it almost in like this dream setting. It also mirrors almost the Freudian therapy situation with him sitting there asking the questions and the other person laying down. It's a very vulnerable, open way to construct an interview, and that's super interesting to me that not only did he go that route again, he kind of showcases it even with Amin really laying down and closing his eyes before he starts speaking, and you have those wide shots of them sitting together in that that way in the room. That's super interesting.
That should be your hook when you get interviews with directors for the podcast, is that they lay down.
I'm gonna conduct therapy sessions with you.
Yeah. In the beginning of the movie, his like sisters, they're like messing with like trading cards of like some kind of famous people.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I remember him playing with his sisters. I don't remember the trading cards right now.
I love that kind of stuff. And it fascinates me, the stuff that exists all over the world that I never get to see.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever that is that's in that movie for a second is clearly a piece of cultural identity to being in Afghanistan or that area maybe. And I just want to know what that fucking thing is, because I bet it's kind of neat. I
also, directly from the opening, I have this memory of it starting with a song, and I couldn't tell you by the love of God what song it was, but I know it instantly ripped me into it, and without them like telling a number or anything, you directly have this feeling of a certain time period due to the song and due to them playing around and dancing to that song in the opening montage. I thought that was very efficient and kind of wholesome way into the story.
Is the opening song Take On Me? It is. Yep.
Is it Take On Me?
It is Take On Me, yeah. To add to that opening bit, he puts on the pink headphones and the music kicks in and it's layered like stained paper. If you've ever seen the Take On Me music video, is very famous for being all hand sketched looking.
Oh.
And it even looks like that music video, but on parchment paper with like instead of scribbled lines, it looks like they're like oil painted lines.
Yeah.
I think that almost set me up to hope that the movie was going to continue being stylized like that. And then it just immediately kind of like it drops flavor.
On a thematic side, it kind of even makes sense that the beginning would be the more colorful, still. The more happy, because they were still not refugees at that point, and he was still a happy child, just living his childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And towards the end, like in the new house and stuff like that, I think it's very vibrant. At least the colors are very vibrant there as well. So we kind of return to the happy place. Just all the in between is where it's more bare bones. I love the chemistry between the two. I mean, it's obviously amazing. They've been friends for forever, but I love the inclusion of their little like side tensions when they talk and joke about liking Jean-Claude Van Damme as a child, and that they joke about liking him for very different reasons.
My cousin growing up was like a huge fan of Jean-Claude Van Damme. So I thought that was kind of funny. I like the relatability of who ever talks about Jean-Claude Van Damme ever.
Yeah.
you never hear like, you know who I really like? Jean-Claude Van Damme. So as we're getting ready to leave, we're shown kind of this montage of non-animated footage, war-torn areas and stuff like that, right? Now, you're a little younger than me, so I don't know if this is something you would have remembered or whatever, but is this kind of footage something that was shown in Austria?
Somewhat. I don't think from like Afghanistan, more like Syria, which was like the big refugee crisis, that the most recent one that really affected Austria in particular as well, where I also was like very aware of what was going on. I wasn't just like a kid. Around 2015 was the peak of that. There were definitely similar images, but yeah, it was Syria, I think, mostly, and not Afghanistan.
Well, so I ask because it's an interesting perspective here. One of the leaders mentioned in the thing, and then they kind of mention it again off and on. That the U.S. was supplying weapons to the Taliban, which then used, and that's the whole, expulsion of their people. And in America, we weren't shown that. That's not something that was ever shown in our news. It's not something that was ever shown to us because we're the bad guys in that situation here. Well, I mean, we're the bad guys in most situations, but at least we make movies. No, but that's our export is entertainment.
You export music, films, and weapons.
I've always thought Mel Gibson's a really good example of the American industry. Is that, man, that fucker's crazy, but he can tell a good story.
That's awesome.
But no, so it was really eye-opening, and I really appreciated the dropping the animation to show this and really show it for what it is, because it is something that our media has very much shielded us from seeing this type of footage, because we are the bad guy there, and that makes it makes people look bad here, and every country wants to fucking protect its own ass, right? So
I kind of love that, like on a thematic sense, that makes so much sense now that they would drop the animation then, because if that kind of footage is almost known for not being shown, then it makes a lot of sense to drop the filter that is supposed to, make things anonymous within the story, and actually like shove it in your face and be like, yeah, this actually happened. We're not just animating this. This is the stuff we are basing this on. It's real. That's lovely.
Yeah.
About the freight container story, that was super heartbreaking to me, because there's a very, not internationally known, but within Austria, it's a known story relating to that 2015 refugee crisis. Through that Balkan route that they also partially take here, a lot of Syrian refugees wanted to get to Europe. And yeah, there was in 2015 a semi-truck found abandoned shortly after the Hungary-Austrian border on the Austrian side. And when the police broke it open, they found 71 dead refugees in there. The smugglers didn't realize that it was an airtight container. And yeah, they apparently, like, they realized once they arrived in Austria, opened it up and just found a bunch of dead people inside and fled the scene, left the truck behind. They were all caught and they are in prison now. But yeah, that's very much seeing this in the movie here and seeing them, like, you know, I saw this story unfold of like the outside. I have the image in mind of the newscast showing the truck just standing there on the side of the road and stuff like that. But getting told a story similar to that and being like stuck within a container, looking and trying to get out again, and all the noises and the sound design of that sequence, that was super heartbreaking to me. That was such an intense scene.
Yeah, that's really, really terrifying.
That one case I'm talking about with the 71 refugees, that's just the most famous one within Austria. I know that there were similar cases just with a smaller amount of victims, but victim is a victim. And I could bet that I just am aware of those cases because it happened in Austria, and that all the neighboring countries have similar stories. And seeing it portrayed like that, it's kind of insane that you don't ever think about the other side and think about what it is sitting inside something like that.
My wife, she fucking does that shit, I'm not gonna lie. So where we live currently, we are like 6 blocks from a train track that goes by constantly, carrying shit all the time. More like 12 blocks. And then a whole like 4 blocks past that is what's called the Columbia River. And it's a huge river. It does a lot of really, really big boats, huge shipping boats. It's a shipping lane. So we literally look out our window and watch giant shipping containers go by daily, all day. And sometimes my wife literally be like, I bet that one's fucking smuggling shit. All the time. So I think about that shit sometimes, man. It's scary.
When they are on a ship a second time, so not in the containers, but being shipped again, we have that sequence of the water starting to pour in. That was super terrifying, sitting there with them in darkness, and all of a sudden you just hear water splashes and then people screaming. Panic just ensues. Like that sequence was horrible. And then followed on, we have a super impactful line, or like impactful to me at least, when he's sitting there with his mother, hugging her, and she is super scared because she can't swim. And he talks about how whenever she brings up death, she brings up the fear of drowning and how it would be the most horrible thing to her. And yeah, he sits there with his brother and his mother and becomes silent. And the interviewer asks, what's going through your mind? And Amin just replies, if we go under, who do I try to save? And my God, oh my God, that's such a horrible, horrible thing to ever think about.
Mm-hmm.
To be put in the situation where you have this possibility ahead of your whole family going under, and you have to decide who's the most important one to you, who's the one you try to save first. Like, what the fuck? That's a thought no one should ever have to have.
Yeah, no, I can't even imagine. It's fucking blech. I really hate being out on the open water, so like you just the thing that they're going through is already terrifying. I get it, Mom. I get it. I'm right there with you with that driving shit. I like to swim. I just don't like being out in the big water, the big open water.
Yeah. And then we have that sequence of the cruise ship finding them. That was an intense mixture of emotions. You have like the desperation of the people just screaming for the big ship and trying to get there, the happiness of being so close to the freedom that they feel like they can almost touch it, and then the side of it's almost like this sad exhibition where all of the tourists on the cruise ship just take out their phones and start filming and start taking pictures. And then followed up by the devastating realization of when, through the speakers, they start to talk about they are gonna bring them back to Estonia and hand them over to the authorities. Oh my god, like that's a 30-second sequence in the movie probably, but there's so many emotions in those 30 seconds. It's, I don't even know what to say.
For me, it was like, as soon as they saw it and were like excited, I was like, that sucks. Because like, you know what's gonna happen.
Mm-hmm.
You know that they're not gonna like, like they're not gonna help you. Like I just assumed that was already the case. Them telling on them is a little bit messed up, but I'm not. It doesn't leave me surprised necessarily. It just sucks. I do want to take one step back though.
Okay.
Because something we didn't acknowledge that I really want to talk about for a second is, we're bringing up a lot of these really powerful, hard to bear moments.
Mm-hmm.
And I think partly because of the animation style and partly because we're consistently experiencing this person's really hard moments, it's easy to lose sight and forget how old he is throughout a lot of this. He only ages himself a couple times, and he's a lot younger than you'd expect him to be each time, I feel like. On that boat, right before that big ship arrives, that exact boat, he lays in the hull or the cabin or whatever it is, and he like shares music with that other boy.
No, you're mixing up two things.
Am I?
Yeah, like in the boat, they are just like the family, and then they get sent back, and they have to make another attempt at fleeing and being trafficked, and that's the second time when it's the more expensive version, and he's laying in the back of a car with the boy.
Okay.
But we can go there. I don't have notes until then.
We experience, like I said, a lot of this movie through that, and we forget that this is not only just like he's experiencing, being a refugee, that life, he's also experiencing growing up still.
Yeah.
And not only growing up, he's experiencing coming to terms with his sexuality. That is both those things are really hard, complex paths in your life. And that scene to me was so beautiful because it illuminates that even though they're hard paths to follow in your life, he's going through something that most people couldn't even imagine having to go through. He's still having these beautiful moments, and those are the things that he's taking away and remembering about this journey.
Mm-hmm. I love the little detail that they, like when they share a song together, basically.
Yes.
They just lay down and they hold the headphones out in a way where they can each listen to one side of the earpiece. The way he looks at him, you have those little intercut shots of close up. He just looks at the nose or something like that, like small parts. You can see him. I guess you can see yourself, kind of the way you first look at having your first crush and stuff like that, and you tend to remember every detail about the face and about, whatever.
Literally checking them out.
Yeah, quite literally, yeah.
Yeah.
I also think a super important part of this movie happens around there. Something I already pointed to is this like policy in Europe of wherever you arrive is where you have to get your refugee status. He didn't make the decision to go to Denmark. He wanted to go to Sweden where his family is, but the traffickers made that decision for him. That's just something that was put onto him, and we expect certain level of violence towards these people. We expect them to be under an enormous stress. We expect them to, that's all of the things you already kind of assume about a refugee story. But I think that's a kind of part of the story that you don't really think about all that much, is how much he's forced into and just live with. Like, he ended up in a different country than he intended. He had to completely deny his past. He had to follow a made-up story. He had to deny his family. Like, that was all taken away from him too. And that's something you don't really think about. I thought that one line was super impactful where he said, "I'm crying even though the story isn't true." It really hit me when he talks about talking to the authorities and giving them the fake life story he had and the fake refugee story he had that the trafficker made up for him in a way where, the authorities can't deny him. Because that's only the reason why, there's like certain bureaucracies for as to who is considered a refugee and who has the right to stay and who will be sent back, which is insane. And that just results in, all those parts of the story. Him bursting out into tears over this fake refugee story just because his real trauma is kind of unfolding within the lie. My God, what a scene.
I want to point out, it's we're kind of nearing the end of that. You mentioned, he really wanted to go to Sweden. In this scene where he's kind of like saying, I have to stay in Denmark and this is where life is or whatever, blah, blah, blah. He puts the headphones on again and he starts more music. And it's Wheel of Fortune by Ace of Base. Ace of Base is famously a Swedish pop band.
Oh.
So it's almost like he's accepting, like, I'm here in Denmark, but I'm never going to forget Sweden.
That's interesting.
You can probably also extrapolate why Wheel of Fortune has some type of meaning in his title, too.
Yeah, true. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, for sure. There's this randomness involved as he was, like, they were obviously to a degree lucky. They did make it out. They did end up in Europe. They were allowed to stay. Yeah, there's quite a bit of that, true.
It's how he found love. Probably never would have. He explains, in Afghanistan, like, gay isn't even a word. Homosexual isn't even a word.
Yeah.
He probably would have forever lived a really repressed life.
For sure.
It's a really, mixed, bittersweet bag.
There's also one more super wholesome moment that even brought me to tears this time around.
Ooh.
It's the weirdest thing that this is the moment that brought me to tears. But when he visits his family in Sweden, finally, and he gets to see them again, his brother is pressing about, do you have a girlfriend? Aren't there beautiful women in Denmark and stuff like that? Until he finally comes out. And then he instantly brings him to a gay bar and just puts some money in his hand and opens the door basically for him and is like, go have fun. And the moment he stepped into that and the music started blasting, my eyes were watering up. I thought that all of that and the acceptance of the brother and him saying, we always knew. And oh my God, the realization probably to him, he has never, been to a gay club, and he was so, there was so much baggage with that knowledge of being gay that he even like tried to talk to a doctor and is like, yeah, I need to be healed. This isn't gay. Like, and then he just walks into there and it's all okay, and it's all okay for his family too. Oh my God, that was such a beautiful moment.
Yeah, I liked it.
I wrote down one more line that kind of relates to something the director also talked about in an interview. Amin says, I had to be tough. Only now that I think about it again and talk through it again, I realize how hard it has been. It kind of shows how going through it, you don't put things together of all the terrors for your own mental safety, really, for your own mental health. You have to distance yourself from the experiences you're going through. And the director said something interesting in a Deadline interview, that during the filming, he pretty much dissociated from everything that his friend told him and mostly looked out for his friend's emotional state and tried to like be aware of how much is this, affecting him right now? Is there anything I can do to help him? And only when he really arrived in the editing room with all of the footage they have filmed in the interview is when it really hit the director of how insane that all is and how intense that story is. So there's this interesting parallel going on. I like that.
Interesting. Yeah. From Middle Eastern immigration, we switch to Africa with Io Capitano. Io Capitano follows the story of Seydeu and Moussa, two teenage cousins from Senegal who go on the difficult journey to Europe. They have to cross the Sahara Desert survive corrupt policemen and soldiers, and get away from the mafia, finally to cross the Mediterranean Sea, where Seydeu has to carry the burden of piloting the small vessel that is supposed to carry them and the other 200 refugees on the ship. What'd you think about this one?
It was interesting to me that you earlier mentioned that you were a bit underwhelmed by Flea because you've seen this one first.
Yeah.
To me, it's a little bit of the opposite. I wasn't totally underwhelmed by this, but I had very high expectations. I've heard high praise about this movie, and I had just rewatched Flea, and Flea is super impactful to me. At times, I felt something was missing from this, but overall, it's an impeccable movie. Don't get me wrong. It is very intense. It is well acted. You have some incredible shots in this. Like the cinematography of this was at times amazing, particularly everything when it went super wide. The wide drone shots in the Sahara Desert following the car, how they are kind of almost disappearing into the endlessness of this place they are in.
Mm-hmm.
And in a similar way, it's staged again on the Mediterranean Sea with the small boat and the big sea. I guess I wish it was like this movie has this kind of magical side to it almost, the
Yes. Yeah, I like
surrealism.
that a lot.
There's those two sequences. And yeah, I love those two. I almost wish it would have used it more. It would have committed a bit more to that one. I guess that would have been perfect for me. But yeah, still great movie.
You're completely right, because it was something I was going to say in a similar criticism I had with the first movie of it having some creative moments, but some that I just felt like they could have gone farther. This movie did the same thing. I didn't expect it to have those moments, but once it instilled that they can exist in this film, right? That's part of the rule set of this film is you can have that. I was like, okay, where's the next one? I want more of that. I love this. This is good. I made a really dumb joke before we started. This movie could have used more captaining. For a movie called Io Capitano, I expected more of the boat scene. It takes kind of a long time for you to get to that point. I actually really was expecting that surrealism would really take hold during that, and it obviously doesn't. And I was kind of let down by that, actually. I'm not gonna lie. So I kind of get what you mean. But yeah, this is a gritty movie.
Yeah, it's
in the correct word usage. The moment it hit me was when they unveil the boat. Right, I kind of noticed it throughout a while, but they unveil the boat, and it's just this destroyed-looking, rusty bucket of a boat. And I wondered if they did that on purpose, like if they made the boat look like that, or they just found a boat that looks like that. Everything in this film is just so gritty and just so, I don't know, the sets are really well done. I don't know how much is set, I don't know how much is on location. I have no idea.
Relating to the boat, I don't know if they dressed it to look like that, but I can definitely tell you that that's how those boats look. Every now and then you'll get imagery of stuff like that happening in the Mediterranean on the news. And yeah, those look like that. They are tiny, they are rusty, they are old, they look like they are barely functioning, and they are crammed to the max of you couldn't fit any more people onto that. Yeah, it absolutely looks like that.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about the production, and then we'll go into story by story, because I don't know anything about the production, and I would like to know.
There's one thing where I initially thought I had a bit of a problem with the story side of things, and it's relevant in relation to the production, where the ending almost felt to me a bit of as if it took away from the realism, because up until that point we see all the horror, we see everything go wrong, and people dying left and right basically, and people being tortured, whatever, all of it. On the boat itself, kind of everything worked out for them. Even the birth on the boat, and the mother was fine, the baby was fine, everyone survived, they didn't run out of water, no one, everything kind of worked out. And we stop before things stop working out, but I'll get to that. So we kind of leave on this almost happy note. with the movie, and to me that felt almost a bit Hollywood trying to get a happy ending in a story that really isn't that much of a happy story. But that being said, when I looked into the production side of this movie, the story is very strict and accurately taken from 3 actual stories of survivors. So like it's not one story that happened to one person. It's a composite of 3 memories basically, and one of them was a 15-year-old boy who piloted a vessel with 250 refugees over the Mediterranean. And everyone survived on that vessel. So it's just straight up factually true. I can't really complain about that.
But it seems all a little suspicious how it all worked out.
Yeah.
No, I get what you mean. It's funny. Despite how dirty things look in the film, it is a little sanitary as far as how it doesn't really take many like risks as far as killing darlings or everything's
the
kind of
protagonists survive. We don't get like the close people to them survive. Yeah, we don't see the suffering directly with them really.
Yeah, I would have been totally fine if this movie would have sidelined when that guy fell off the back of the Jeep or whatever, the truck in the middle of the Sahara, and we just followed what the fuck happened to him. I would have absolutely been all about that.
I doubt that person's story continued for much longer after that point, I assume.
No, it wouldn't have been the same movie at all, but that would have also been a terrifying movie.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that would have been, you could really make that a really fucked up movie.
I can continue on with a few production notes.
Yeah.
The 2 protagonists, the director found in Dakar, so like I think it's the capital of Senegal, big city in Senegal,
okay,
for sure. And they weren't actors before on screen. One of them at least went to an acting school, so he tries to become an actor. The friend, not the protagonist. It's interesting because they both have dreams of going to Europe or America. The protagonist really wants to go to Europe. The friend character really wants to go to America, to Hollywood. But those 2 have never left Senegal prior to making this movie. So they shot this all in continuity.
Oh, wow.
And through that, these 2 guys kind of experienced the leaving their country for the first time and going to Europe, quite literally, alongside the story. You know, it mirrors the reality in a way.
That's really cool.
They also shot it in a way where the director never told them the whole story of what's going to happen. He only gave them basically the screenplay for the next few pages at a time, so that they would, they were uncertain about would they even survive, would they ever arrive in Europe, which is an interesting idea to get the performance out of them, I think.
Yeah. A little comparison stuff. We're here now, before I talk about the first movie. It's so rough for me to like, where the people are leaving under this really intense duress of survival, right?
Yeah.
In this movie, they are leaving for their reasons and for a better life. And, they are told at every step, like, yo, you're making a really dumb decision. Like, you really shouldn't do this. You're going to die. Don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they still kind of do it. It's a weird flip. Their whole refugee process, not refugee, because they're not refugees necessarily, are they? Are they? I don't know. See, that's that American.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, their situation is much more voluntary. It's 100% voluntary compared to the one from Flea. So it's very interesting how much harder it seems like their journey is. I do want to point out a side note that just really interested me. When they go get information about how to get out of Senegal, the guy that they give it to, he's like, don't do it. There's dead bodies all over Europe, blah, blah, kind of like, yeah. I mean, you live there. You're stepping over them all the time. You know what I'm talking about.
Directly, all of the dead people in front of my house, yeah.
Yeah. We shovel snow, you shovel dead bodies out of your driveway.
Oh
I
my
get
god.
it. That's so messed up.
Oh my god, that
Um,
was so bad.
That's terrible. Something that really struck me is when they're leaving and they're kind of like talking about it. One of them goes, "Did you see he had a goatee?" And the other one's like, "I know, wow." And like they're both like, "Oh," like freaked out that he had a goatee. Is that a thing? What?
I don't know.
Again, I'm uninformed. I'm an uninformed person in a lot of ways, certain cultures, right? They mention Allah later. So is it that it's like a Senegalese thing, or is it a religious thing of beards? Is it that they like to be clean shaven in Senegal? I don't know. What's the cultural stigma
What's the
against a
significance? Yeah.
goatee? Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't know. But there's not like, not everyone is shaven. We see that kind of in that ritual they do before leaving. That guy
Yeah,
has a
he's
full
got a
beard,
beard.
right?
He's got a full
Yeah.
beard. But that's the thing I noticed later is that almost everybody either had a full beard or didn't in Senegal, except for that one guy.
Yeah. How dare he?
Yeah. In Flea, there's an extreme level of compassion for what's happening to these people.
Mhm.
Do you feel that same thing because this was a voluntary action?
It's a bit more nuanced.
Mhm.
I think overall, I would consider Flea to be the more nuanced movie, but the very decision to leave in the first place is definitely a more nuanced discussion here. That's actually an ongoing discussion in when it comes to immigration to Europe, or they call it like economic refugees or something like that.
Okay.
It is, I would translate it like that. I don't know if the term even exists in English, but in German, that's kind of how it would translate. Right wing politicians like to bring up those people and be like, yeah, we obviously don't have anything against war refugees, but those people just trying to make a buck here, those bad people. Like, I always knew that even if it's just that, quote unquote, just that, then you have to have a miserable, maybe not miserable life, but miserable outlook on your future to make that decision, to go there, to go through all of that. And it's very clear, like it was to me in advance, but just seeing it here, it's even more clear now that they go through a lot of suffering, no matter what the original circumstances
Yes.
are as to why they go through the suffering. And to then have like the audacity and look at someone who arrived here and maybe started the journey because they had no possibilities of a good job or a good life ever wherever they started from, and be like, yeah, you don't deserve this, is kind of insane if you look at what these people went through to
get
be
that,
here
yeah.
in the
To
first
get
place.
that, yeah.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I kind of think similarly about them. I understand that there is more nuance here than with the other case, but I kind of feel the same for both.
That's what's up. Yep. No, absolutely agree. I will say that like there are moments in the movie where I'm like, well, you're just making a dumb decision right now. Like that's just a terrible thing to be doing. One moment where I felt the complete opposite was when the guy's like, okay, they're gonna steal your money. The only place you can put your money is in your ass. It's the only place it's gonna be safe. And the one dude's like, I'm never gonna do that. And the other guy does it. And I was thinking to myself, like, well, fucking the guy who didn't do it's gonna get his money stolen. What an idiot. He's making the dumb decision. They really flipped that around, didn't they?
Yeah.
That was the one moment I was like, well, I feel bad now for saying that keep thinking.
For Moussa.
Well, I just up until that point I kept thinking they were making dumb decisions. Or that one character was. And I was just like, oh, I guess he is making the right decision. Shit.
I assume they would have found it just easier if they didn't do that. I assume they would have lost their money either way.
That's for sure. Yeah. But he got in trouble for like trying to hide it. If he would have just
true.
give him the money, it would have been a lot. They would have just let him go, probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. I guess I will go a bit.
Let's head back. Yeah. Yeah, let's head
Yeah.
back a little bit.
In the very beginning, I love how within a few minutes we get to see a lot of Senegalese culture. That idea of what I earlier mentioned of the happy childhood and flee. I think this is what Io Capitano does even better here. And it needs to be, because as we already pointed out, it is a more nuanced discussion. So we need to kind of talk about the culture and the things they leave behind. It like starts with this beautiful one take of going through the streets, and you see how people live, you see how they work, and then we have that beautiful sequence of them dancing and celebrating, and the drums. It's all very much in contrast as to what expect initially to see of a movie about, fleeing from a place. I think it kind of needs to happen to have like this foundation of, the mother disagreeing and being like, yeah, don't go. that's all beautifully done.
Her tearing into the cousin, so funny.
Yeah.
I know this was your idea. No, not at all. I didn't do it. 30 seconds later. Did you tell your mom what we're doing? It's so funny.
Once they left, and I think they arrive in Dakar is when they first meet the traffickers. There's that trafficker walking around whispering, Libya, Libya, Libya. that was so incredibly funny to me, because it just perfectly reminded me of how drug dealers walk around here, and they're like, cocaine, cocaine, cocaine. Whatever they're trying to sell, walking through crowds and silently, repeatedly whispering whatever the word is, and trying to see if anyone turns towards them and follows them. It was so interesting to me how, this is thousands of kilometers from home for me, and but illegal crime seems to work the same way everywhere around the world.
Man, I have never ever had that happen in my life.
Oh, really?
No.
Do drug dealers not work that way in America?
No, man. No.
Yeah, I had absolutely had the experience of people walking past me, like sneaking super close to me, and in the exact moment where they were close enough to me so that only I could hear it, they would just drop MDMA or something like that and continue walking, and then quickly turn around and look if I'm following them or something like that. Like that's very much a real interaction I've been through, and this reminded me so much of it. Him just walking around and sneaking past them. Libya, Libya.
That's so funny. Yeah, no, I think the only experiences I've really seen or had with like people pushing on the street is in America is always like either the guy is like, you gotta know a guy who knows a guy, and they're not gonna like take you to meet their guy, and it's all in the hush hush or whatever. Or it's just some dude who's like walking down the road and he's like, hey, do you do coke? Like super loud. It's always just some dude like you're hanging out outside, you're like in your living room, and you're like looking out your window, and some guy's walking down the road, and he looks at me and goes, you want to buy some weed? It's never quiet.
Not quite as sneaky.
It's never quiet and sneaky. I mean, quiet and sneaky and subtle are not things that I think are synonymous with the American behavior in the first place.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, give us drugs, and that's just amplified. But no, that's super funny. Yeah, the whole like Libya. That's all I was thinking about in that scene. It's so clear by the way the guy's walking around Libya, that this guy doesn't give a shit about these dudes. He doesn't get. They're just money to him. He's like, I'll do this just for you. I don't do it for anybody else. Just shut the fuck up. You say that to every single person that passes by. He's
yeah.
And they just so blindly buy into it and are like faithful to him and are like, all right, cool, thank you, and like so excited, and it just sucks. Usually the scenes that like evoke some type of like emotion, I laugh about.
Yeah.
So it's funny that this scene made you laugh, and this scene really bummed me out, because I was just like, it just sucks how like naive he is at this moment still.
Yeah, you're right. Usually it would be the other way around. When we are then on our way through the Sahara Desert, I think it's only there when we really use that. It's not like hard cuts, it's all cross-fading transitions within that sequence with the shots. And I thought that made so much sense. Like, not only does it imply a lot of time going by, which is usually the way cross-fading transitions are used, but also due to the nature of the Sahara Desert just being this solid color, orange, bright, just like vibrant colors. Whenever you fade between like one shot to the next, the people would kind of disappear into the light yellow or orange of the sand. And to me, it really made it feel super hot. It's as if they are dissolving into the heat of the desert. Like that worked so perfectly well. It's kind of...
It was almost like more than just a fade. It was almost like a blur to fade. Because like the light would also like like take on that effect when it gets like a lens gets wet or something, like the light
it's blown out.
became thank you. Good wording. Yeah, hell yeah. Very good wording. I don't think you wear glasses, but I was gonna say it's like when you are wearing glasses or whatever and they get wet. I like that a lot. I didn't even notice that transition changes at that point, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think it's just in that sequence in the desert when we have that kind of editing, but it perfectly makes sense for the setting, for the feeling it tries to portray. The first hallucination sequence happens there with the woman.
Oh man, what a stressful moment. Well, that was so stressful when like he's just like hanging out with her while she's basically dying and they're leaving him behind.
Yeah. The clock is ticking. Moussa is screaming for him and like repeatedly reminding him about the dire situation they are in. As the woman that he's trying to crop up is like dying in his arms at that moment, that one sip of water she took didn't change anything about it anymore. She was like gone.
It's a hard scene.
Having that sequence afterwards with him just imagining carrying her around like a balloon almost. Oh man,
it's exactly a balloon.
Yeah, that was so beautiful.
That's the stuff I wanted more of.
Same.
That's when then they make camp, and that's when they get raided, right?
Yeah, they arrive at the Libya border in the desert, and they get raided.
They're forced to drink some kind of weird white mystery liquid that's terrible sounding.
Yeah, some laxatives. I think it's interesting again. It doesn't get addressed, but they had a tour guide with them, basically, Someone led them on this exact route, and this tour guide is still with them once the raid basically is over. So you can assume the tour guide was just left alone. And this is kind of that there has to be some sort of arrangement to this almost. You have to assume that those kind of people raiding them and the traffickers getting them there are somehow cooperating for
it's
max
all handoff
profit.
a little bit. Yeah.
This movie really shows in a great way how vulnerable these people are. If you are a refugee and you have like a fake passport and you have, all of those things, there's no one protecting you. You are an absolute victim to all the circumstances, and people wanting to take advantage of you will take advantage of you because they can, and no one is going to stop them. And that movie really was very powerful in showing that. I think that's the biggest strength of this movie.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. Again, despite the fact that it all kind of works out, which a little bit undoes that.
Yeah. We'll get to the ending. I have my thoughts on that as well.
I mean, even every moment, there really isn't a lot of moments in the movie where it really, really goes bad for them. I mean, he even gets Moussa back. Like Moussa's leg is fine, basically.
Finding each other again, yeah, that was.
It's not just an ending thing.
Yeah, I wish they kind of committed just to them being split up, and that was part of the sacrifice, basically, that they didn't both make it. Would have given it all a bit more weight.
Yeah, there's a couple ways it could have played out, honestly. I usually don't like drama films in the first place aren't really my big thing. I often feel like they're trying to be heartstring pulley. They're trying to elicit an emotion out of you, and sometimes I think that's manipulative.
Yeah,
You know, a lot of Oscar bait movies tend to do that type of thing.
for sure.
This was pretty close to that feeling sometimes
Yes,
because
yes.
of that. I did still actually enjoy it, but no, this is really on the edge for me. I almost gave it a lower score on Letterboxd because of that entire feeling.
Yeah, it's part of what I meant earlier with, the way everything comes together in the end. It feels a bit Hollywood. It feels a bit.
Yeah. If it doesn't get you because it's sad, it'll get you because it's a great journey with a good ending.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's trying to tick all the boxes for you or whatever. He does meet a lot of really interesting characters throughout the way that I really liked. I guess if you want to like accept this Hollywoodism of it, right?
Mhm.
You can look at it as you are seeing these the smugglers
Traffickers.
make it, the traffickers, the people that are making this all happen. In America, we call them coyotes.
Coyotes.
But it's Mexico to America. That's specifically what they're called.
Oh.
Yeah. It kind of shows a good duality in a way because you're seeing the horrors of these traffickers and these terrible things that these people are doing, right? But you're also seeing the human resilience side of this, and you're seeing the positivity that people are continuously putting forward toward them, right?
Hmm.
The man, the bricklayer that saves his life,
Yeah,
teaches him a trade, teaches him how to lay brick, all that kind of stuff, whatever.
that character was so important. One of the most impactful scenes surrounding all of that, like the mafia and bricklayer sequences, was to me when not even the torture itself or like the pressure they were put through with that, but the moment where he, after the second fantasy sequence, where he wakes up or like still in his dreams, basically starts screaming for his mother, and
Hmm.
and the guy just comforts him. Like, my God, that was an just seeing that boy completely destroyed emotionally and break down and screaming for his mother, that is thousands of kilometers away, and will, there's no chance she will hear it or anything, or could do anything to help him in this situation. That was just heartbreaking.
I really liked the end of their relationship. They basically says, you want to continue on with me,
Hmm.
or go look for person, like I'll go look for the people. They have an emotional hug. In another life, this guy could have assumed basically the father relationship for this kid.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
That's what they've built, and he's gonna give that up to go find his cousin. It's powerful to me because though that goodbye exists and they have their hug, right? There's no fanfare of this guy's departure. There's nothing, how to put it. It's not a visually pleasing shot on
Hmm.
purpose. We watch him just walk away. Not even like with a big purpose. He looks like he's just kind of like sauntering away. Like, all right, on to my next. I'm gonna go off into the distance now, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's very anticlimactic how he just leaves. And that is very real. That's such a fucking real shitty feeling thing, is that so many goodbyes are exactly like that.
Hmm.
Are just, and then it was just over and you're gone. And I like that they focused on that.
Yeah.
But to round off what I was saying, I like that there's a lot of positive things in this. And it does make sense why, it ends up leading to the ending it has.
Hmm.
Because it is, I think, trying to show you that people aren't just terrible. It's really easy to tell this kind of story and just paint it as people are fucking terrible.
It kind of makes sense from that perspective of things, because by the end there are no traffickers left on the boat. It's just them, and they are with each other, and they are helping each other, and they are trying to keep their minds together and not break apart. And yeah, it's just their resilience all connecting that keeps the ship ongoing and that keeps the community alive at that moment.
Hmm. I just want to, I guess, just say like something they don't point out on purpose, but just is indicative of what's happening in the films and that you see refugees, immigrants, whatever word you want to use for whichever situation.
Mhm.
These are people. These are absolute people, obviously. But these are often really intelligent people. These characters that we see in this movie are both, I'm pretty sure, over trilingual.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, like in this one, we see him speaking Senegalese, we see him speaking French, we see him speaking Italian at one point.
Though they are joking a bit more than actually, like they are just saying a few phrases. Yeah. Mamma mia.
Yeah, it's true. That is true. That's true. But I want to say he speaks one other thing at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously, Flea, we see him speaking Dutch. We see him speaking. I'm not going to claim to know if it's Urdu, if it's Arabic. I don't know what he was speaking.
I think Arabic. I'm also not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but we see him speaking that. We see him speaking Russian. We see him speaking, English at one point. He speaks a lot of. Both these characters speak a lot of languages in these movies. They're both really very, very intelligent characters. I like that isn't. It's not like a painted focal point of the movie. It's just this is.
It's not drawing attention to it. It's just accepting it as one of its fact that like these people are educated. Yeah.
100%. Yes. That's the normalization of the people need to have, because they are people.
Yeah, a big driving force behind this movie was also, the director said, it's about putting a face to the numbers.
Yes.
Because in the news we get to like hear about so and so many, like, I don't know, 27,000 refugees, I think, died in the Mediterranean over the last 10 years or something like that, on with boats like these just going down. We get those numbers, but we don't associate those numbers with people. We don't have a face to them. And that was very much a point of this movie, to give them a face.
And it's a beautiful thing.
Two more little things. First, a cute little trivia that is in the beginning of the movie, very beginning of the movie, when Seydeu is packing up in the night whilst the family is sleeping, and one of his sisters wakes up. When they shot that, when the moment came where the sister was supposed to get up and like talk to him, she just didn't. And they were a little confused until they realized that the girl has actually fallen asleep. So the director like gently woke her up and was like, "Maman, you're cute." And then she like woke up and instantly was in character and started acting out, and that's the take we got. Like in that take that we see in the film, 10 seconds earlier she was fast asleep.
That's super great.
I guess the final thing is about the reality of the ending. I'm not fully sure how I feel about this, but here's the thing. We end this on kind of an uplifting note of, yeah, they all made it, everyone survived, and then cut to black. As I pointed out, this boat journey is based on a real person. He was 15 years old at the time when he got that boat across the Mediterranean, and everyone survived on his boat. And he was screaming at the helicopter, actually, Io Capitano, fully proud that he made it happen. And he was arrested for that as the captain, as a trafficker, basically. He was put into jail for 6 months in Italy. And I'm not fully sure how I feel about that, how I feel about the fact that we kind of ended in a moment where it feels like a happy ending, where it feels Hollywood. And not talk about the fact that, they that fucked him up.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, cut it off to, save it to make a happy ending. Fuck.
Yeah. However, the film is already super important for Italy. There's this great irony in it, where it was funded at a time when a left-wing party was running Italy. Now that it released, a very right-wing party is running Italy right now. So they were kind of not able to ignore this movie. It won 2 super important awards at the biggest Italian film festival, 2 Silver Lions at the Venice Film Festival. The Pope invited them to the Vatican to have like a public screening there of the movie. A bunch of schools all around Italy cooperated with them and arranged screenings of this and made it part of the lectures in the school.
Wow.
It's in general, being one of the 5 nominated movies and another nomination for Italy at the Academy Awards, it kind of became a cultural representation for the country, which the government really can't like.
That's such a great bold move, being is that the country has it's in the movie for all of 8 seconds.
Yeah, I had this discussion with my brother because usually with how film funding works, you have to have, in addition to having a portion of the team that works on the film, be the nationality of where the film funding comes from. So if I apply for Austrian film funding, a part of the team needs to be Austrian people working in the film industry. And also, at least that's how it works in Austria, it needs to be partially filmed in Austria. I assume that's also the case with Italian film funding, but my assumption would be then that all of the water scenes were filmed in Italian waters, so like off the coast of Italy, and therefore technically all filmed in Italy. And that would make up, like, I don't know, 25% probably of the runtime that would have been filmed on Italian ground, quote unquote. Yeah, so that's my assumption of how that worked out.
I still like it.
Yeah, I like it too. With all that being said, they didn't need to include the fantasy parts that they even did. It was still a bold move. They still pulled it off fantastically with the way it was integrated. It has still incredible cinematography, great fucking performances from first-time actors. Very impactful story, obviously, even though we already mentioned that it might be a bit tearjerky at times. And just the general cultural impact it already has is great. No doubt about it.
Very nice. Good meta cinema.
For the next episode, we're gonna go to the gym and get pumped with 2 very current movies. The first prescription being The Iron Claw. Released in 2023 and directed by Sean Durkin, this film tells the real story of the Van Erich brothers, often called the greatest family in wrestling. It shows the extreme pressure and power struggle within the family and all the nuances, terrors, and trauma the family dynamic involved. It stars Harris Dickens, Jeremy Allen White, and Zac Efron.
Your second prescription is the 2024 romantic thriller Love Lies Bleeding. Directed by Rose Glass, it follows Kristen Stewart and Katie O'Brien as a gym manager and bodybuilder respectively, as they navigate a relationship while getting swept up into their criminal family. It garnered a lot of attention at its Sundance premiere, and since then at other big festivals like Berlinale. If you don't want to get spoiled for either of these films, make sure to check them out by the next appointment 2 weeks from now. I'm Devin.
I'm George, and this was your Medicinema.